And it is now my pleasure to turn today's program over to your first speaker, Laura Cantrell with Meridian Institute. Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Mid-Atlantic Regional Planning Body, I'd like to welcome you to this public webinar. We're very glad that you've taken the time to tune in and learn about activities of the Mid-Atlantic RPB since its last public meeting that took place in Norfolk, Virginia in September. I'm going to quickly run through the objectives and the agenda for this webinar, and then I'm going to turn it to our federal RPB co-lead, Bob LaBelle, with the Department of the Interior's Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, who's going to provide some additional context about the RPB's activities and set the stage for our presentations today. This webinar is a rather lengthy one. It's scheduled to go until 2 o'clock, and the RPB has a lot of information to share with you and is looking forward to your input and your questions. The objectives for this webinar are to provide our Mid-Atlantic stakeholders with an update on the development of draft interjurisdictional coordination actions for regional ocean planning in the Mid-Atlantic region. As I said, these are updates since the September in-person RPB meeting. The RPB also wants to receive input on these draft IJC actions and answer any questions that you all have about those draft IJC actions. We will be turning to several speakers, RPB members, who will go over IJC actions related to various topics. We will take some breaks along the way to see what questions have been posed by those of you who are with us today, and then we'll have a dedicated time for Q&A at the end of all of the presentations. So let me just say a few more things about the agenda before I turn it over to Bob. I've already mentioned that in a moment he's going to set the stage and provide a brief summary of how the RPB has been working to develop the draft IJC actions. After Bob, Sarah Cooksey, RPB member representing the Delaware Coastal Programs, will present on the topic of implementation of the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Action Plan, focusing on information developed by a small group of RPB members on sustaining and enhancing intergovernmental coordination. After that, we're going to hear from what the RPB is referring to as champions. These are folks who are helping to coordinate small groups of RPB members who are working on interjurisdictional coordination actions in various topic areas. The topics and speakers that you will be hearing from today are in the following order. First, we'll hear from Laura McKay of Virginia, who will present on healthy ocean ecosystems. Then we'll hear from Doug Simpson of the Coast Guard, who will talk about marine commerce and navigation. We'll turn back to Bob LaBelle, who will present on both offshore wind energy and also offshore sand management. Kevin Chu of NOAA will present on fisheries science and management. Kelsey Leonard of the Shinnecock Indian Nation and our RPB tribal co-lead will present on tribal uses. Joe Atangan of the DoD Joint Chiefs of Staff will present on national security. Liz Semple with New Jersey will talk about non-consumptive recreation. We'll hand it back to Laura McKay to talk about the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Data Portal. We'll then turn to David Kaiser with NOAA to talk about RPB discussions related to the Coastal Zone Management Act. And then finally, our state co-lead, RPB co-lead, Gwen Schultz of Maryland, will give us an overview of upcoming stakeholder engagement opportunities. And as I said, after all of that, we'll have whatever remaining time available to us before wrapping up at 2 to entertain your questions. So in addition to the folks that I've mentioned who are going to be presenting on the various topics, we have a few other RPB members and alternates who are on the line today and are also available to assist or offer input during any of the Q&A. And let me just tell you who those folks are. With EPA, we have Buddy LeBou. With Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, we have Leanne Bullen. State of Delaware, John Clark. State of New York, Karen Chitello, Mike Snyder, Peter Klaus. Pennsylvania, and Andy Zimba. All right, so I'm almost done with the preliminaries, but I want to make sure that you know that there are several opportunities for members of the public to offer your feedback to the Mid-Atlantic RPB, and I want to just walk through those. First of all, during this webinar, you can submit a question through the Q&A function of this webinar. Some of you have no doubt, participated in other Mid-Atlantic RPB webinars, so this should sound familiar to you. We will be tracking and organizing the questions as they come in, and in addition to trying to pause along the way periodically to take a few questions, we'll have the Q&A session at the end. We're going to do our best to get to as many of the questions as we can, depending on how much inventory we have of your questions. If your question does not get answered during this webinar, it will be captured for the record. And you can submit your questions through the chat feature anytime during the webinar, starting now all the way through to the very end. And then, as a reminder, your questions and comments are always welcome. You're welcome to submit them through to the BOEM email address that you see there on the slide. A final process detail: several materials will be made available on RPB's website in days following this webinar, and these materials include an audio and video recording of the webinar, a full transcript of the webinar, the full slide presentation, a record of all of the chat questions and comments that we receive through the chat function, and a list of webinar participants. So with that, I would like to turn it to RPB Federal Co-Lead Bob LaBelle to share some context and an overview of the RPB's activities today. Bob?
Thank you, Laura, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. It's an important meeting, and glad to see a good turnout. First, I want to acknowledge my co-leads. The state co-lead on the RPB is Gwen Schultz from Maryland, and she is also on the Mid-Atlantic Regional Council of the Ocean Management Board. And our tribal co-lead is Kelsey Leonard of the Shinnecock Indian Nation in Long Island, New York. Next slide, please. So I want to share a brief overview of the RPB and its purpose. The Mid-Atlantic RPB was established in 2013 pursuant to the National Ocean Policy signed by the President in 2010. The mission of the RPB is to carry out coordinated efforts to address current challenges and emerging opportunities through a collaborative process among federal, state, tribal, and Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council representatives. And of course, this is all to improve our understanding of how the Mid-Atlantic Ocean and its resources are being used, managed, and conserved. Mid-Atlantic Ocean planning focuses on state, tribal, and federal ocean and coastal waters off the states of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia, to help guide resource conservation and economic development by facilitating information sharing, fostering collaboration, and improving decision-making about a growing number of ocean users vying for ocean resources and space. And we always stress the RPB is not a regulatory body, and it has no independent legal authority. Instead, its aim is to improve the effectiveness of federal, state, and tribal implementation of responsibilities in the Mid-Atlantic Ocean. As you can see on the slide, the RPB consists of 6 Mid-Atlantic states, 3 federally recognized tribes, the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council, 8 federal agencies, and Connecticut, serving as an ex officio member. Federal agencies in the RPB include the Departments of Agriculture, Commerce, Defense, Energy, Homeland Security, Interior, and Transportation, and the Environmental Protection Agency. The RPB encourages stakeholders to stay informed and provide comments to us at any time via email, and you note on the bottom of the slide, our website and email address is shown there. Next slide, please. I want to briefly note some completed RPB activities. We have held 4 in-person meetings to date in September 2013 in New Jersey, May 14 in Maryland, January 15 in New York, and September 15 in Norfolk. The meeting summaries and presentations are available on our website, and we've been pursuing via 3 work groups to develop different aspects of the Ocean Action Plan, which include interjurisdictional coordination efforts, data synthesis, and the regional ocean assessment. Now, stakeholder engagement is an integral part of all of these efforts, and we are implementing a work plan that has served as our planning tool and to guide RPB activities leading to the Ocean Action Plan development by the end of next year. Our ROA, Regional Ocean Assessment Work Group, prepared a white paper entitled Brief Overview of the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Characteristics, Trends, and Challenges. This was for the RPB to establish a basic common understanding of topics and help focus and guide our discussions in the region. In August, Marco hosted tribal listening sessions in New York and Virginia, and we are pleased to have the Oneida Indian Nation and the Pamunkey Indian Tribe as part of the RPB, along with the Shinnecock Indian Nation. Next slide, please. This slide provides an overview of IJC action development both before and after the September 2015 meeting in Norfolk, Virginia. As a reminder, the individual proposed actions that are presented today should be considered as part of a broader approach to identifying and addressing ocean planning issues that cross federal agencies, states, and tribes. The RPB is deliberating on the draft IJC action ideas that we will discuss today, and this is all for possible inclusion of these ideas in the draft Ocean Action Plan, or OAP for short. As I just mentioned, the RPB formed internal work groups to develop different aspects of the draft OAP. Updates regarding their progress on healthy ocean ecosystems, offshore wind, sand management, navigation and commerce, national security, fisheries, travel uses, recreation, and coastal zone management will be presented today. I want to point out that we have a detailed Gantt chart posted on our website titled Updated Mid-Atlantic RPB Timeline. It runs through December 2016, and it lays out the timing for OAP development going forward. It includes the steps the RPB intends to take as we work toward the milestone of submitting our OAP to the National Ocean Council in late 2016. During the September RPB meeting of this year, we discussed interjurisdictional coordination actions and the outline for the Ocean Action Plan. Since that meeting, a lot more discussion has occurred among RPB members and with stakeholders to further define the actions. Additional refinement will happen through the end of 2015. Next slide, please. So, this slide provides a brief overview of the next steps for OAP development. We're starting to compile the information for the draft OAP in the coming months to be able to present draft OAP components at the next RPB meeting in March 2016. Data synthesis products and the regional ocean assessment are being completed, and an update will be shared by Marco in late January. The RPB will continue to engage stakeholders throughout all of these next steps, and I want to make a special note that RPB State Co-Lead Gwynn Schultz will share more about opportunities for stakeholder engagement later in today's presentation. Now, our goals for 2016 are to release the draft OAP for review, receive public input, and then release the final OAP later that year for certification by the National Ocean Council. In 2017 and beyond, the RPB will work on implementation of the plan. We'll also continue to work to formalize interjurisdictional coordination commitments, and we'll monitor our plan implementation efforts and make periodic updates to the Ocean Action Plan. So thank you. This is a great start, I think, to get going, and let's get to the good stuff.
Great. So thank you, Bob. And just to your last point about implementation efforts, let's hear next from Sarah Cooksey to talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you to all the folks that have taken the time today to listen to us and exchange information. Next slide, please. In Norfolk in September at the Marco stakeholder event, as well as the RPB event that followed the next 2 days, there was discussion and ideas and thoughts about how should we implement the Ocean Action Plan and what happens in the future after 2016. A draft summary of our current thinking is outlined in this slide entitled Objectives. Most of the people at both of the events that spoke or submitted comments thought that the RPB should continue in some manner, that there should be some type of forum or an entity to continue beyond the completion of the plan that would advance the actions, monitor, evaluate, and then, if warranted, modify the plan. It was also important to those that spoke to continue to engage stakeholders and foster intergovernmental communication and coordination. We also thought we should address the resources required to support the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Action Plan's implementation. And the process, however we decide to do this process in the future, it was important that we reduce any administrative burdens and continue to further enhance stakeholder engagement opportunities. Next slide, please. So right now our thinking is that we would be successful if we effectively found a way to do these following things. Fulfill the responsibilities that are assigned to the regional planning body to implement, monitor, evaluate, and modify the OAP. Reduce the administrative burden. Provide more flexibility for engaging stakeholders and experts on specific actions, and to further enhance communications about ongoing governmental activities that are related to the plan. So those are the only slides I have, just these 2 slides, because we've been so focused on completing the OAP that we're just now think about what's going to happen at the end of 2016. So I'd be happy to hear some comments about that, and otherwise, Laura, I'm done.
All right, great. Thank you, Sarah. We're going to keep going for a few more presenters, and then we'll pause to see what questions. We don't actually have any questions submitted yet, but I'm sure we'll be getting some here shortly. So we're now going to hear from several of the champions of small groups that are working on interjurisdictional coordination actions related to various topic areas. And we're going to start with Laura McKay, who's going to talk about some of the proposed actions related to healthy ocean ecosystems, which is one of the goals of the regional planning body, as noted in the framework that it produced earlier on in its work. So Laura, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Laura, and good morning, everyone. Next slide, please. So, as you may recall, the framework for the Mid-Atlantic ocean planning process had 2 goals, and one of them was to promote ocean ecosystem health, functionality, and integrity through conservation, protection, enhancement, and restoration. And 2 of the objectives were, as you see on the slide, discover, understand, protect, and restore the ecosystem, and account for changes and increased risks. Next slide, please. So to do that, we have 5 basic actions that we're working on. And for those of you who were with us at the September RP meeting, there are, I want to point out, some slight changes to the 5 that we presented then. We've here merged 2 of them so that we are handling the in-depth reviews of ecologically rich areas and region-wide ecological features as one action, and I'll talk more about those in a minute. And the new one that we've added, number 5 now at the bottom, is to collaborate on regional approaches to marine debris reduction. The other 3 in the middle have stayed pretty much the same, but I'll go into them in the next slides. But basically, we would like to establish ocean health indicators and metrics and develop a ocean research forum that's geared toward research needs for improved management and address some specific climate change issues. So we've really listened to the stakeholders. These changes are a result of what we heard in September. And the other important thing to note is, again, in response to stakeholders, we have taken out mention of developing management recommendations. So next slide, please. So the first action, we'll just run through the steps here, but basically the first step is to coordinate on the definitions of ecologically rich areas and region-wide ecological features with the Northeast RPB and also our Marine Life Data Analysis Team, also known as MDAT, so that we have consistency in the methodology of what we're calling these areas. So once we've settled on the definition of ERAs, and there's work to be done to figure that out, but will likely involve concepts such as high abundance, high biodiversity, species at risk. Those kinds of considerations would go into how we define an ERA and REF. Once we've done that, we would take the following steps. With stakeholder input and expert input, and based on the availability of high-quality data, we would identify these areas for an in-depth review. And the in-depth review would be involve overlaying the human uses within each of those areas and reaching out to stakeholders to understand their interest in those areas, documenting the ecological functions and values where we do have sufficient data, and also documenting the current management practices within that area and local and traditional knowledge for those areas. Next slide. We would also then try to identify trends in the health of those specific areas and how they may be changing. And then we would discuss all of these draft findings with stakeholders, scientific experts, and research managers, and pull together a final finding that would be made available to all the interested parties. So we fall short of making management recommendations. We recognize the concerns stakeholders had that doing so and putting recommendations in the plan, and then requiring that once the plan is approved, that federal agencies be consistent with it. They cross that line of regulatory authority, which the RPB does not have. So this would be basically looking to develop and coordinate more in-depth information on these ecologically rich areas. We would have to update and rerun that marine life data analysis model as new data becomes available, and so this would be an iterative process, and the desired outcome is opportunities for improved management of these important places. Next slide. To establish the Mid-Atlantic Ocean indicators and metrics, we would convene an interagency work group and review and evaluate the parameters of ocean health that are already being measured by a variety of federal agencies and other partners. We would hold a workshop to consider the suite of indicators and get public input and stakeholder scientific input. on those and then finalize a set of indicators to be used. We would then establish procedures for review and updating of data to the website and create a dashboard so that that would be easily seen by the public, and hopefully have a system where updating would be fairly automatic by the agency that collects the data. Next slide, please. The research forum, and you may hear this cut across several of the IJC actions, but basically we would like to establish a forum to share current and planned Mid-Atlantic Ocean research and have an interagency workshop to identify research that's needed to better understand ocean attributes in the region and develop mechanisms to use these new research findings to improve management. The outcome here, again, would be a targeted list of research. We'd really like to try to prioritize research for the area that would really help inform management issues and needs. Next slide. For climate change, there's a lot of work, as you know, by a lot of different entities on climate issues, and so we tried to focus on some very specific ones for our region where we think there may be some gaps and some opportunities to do some additional work on a regional basis. And the first is to foster the establishment of an ocean acidification monitoring network, and that is part of the larger national ocean policy to do so, but we'd like to have a more comprehensive, in-depth look at this in the Mid-Atlantic region. So we would review the existing efforts and identify gaps. We would also work together to try to pool resources and identify funding streams to have a more robust ocean acidification monitoring network in the Mid-Atlantic. And the second topic would be to do some additional work on mapping projected shifts in species distributions. And in this action, we would focus on the non-fish species because, as you'll hear Kevin Chu mention in the Fisheries IJC action, they would be addressing fish more specifically in that action. So here we would be looking at things like the marine mammals, the sea turtles, the marine birds. And again, we'd pull parties together to look at existing efforts and try to map the projected shifts in those habitats and then post those maps on the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Data Portal. Next slide, please. And finally, and this is the new one that we recently added, so we have a little more work to do, but there are currently efforts underway that this action could really help bolster and solidify. So the idea here is to collaborate on regional approaches to marine debris reduction. We all know plastics in the ocean is becoming a more and more important problem to focus on. Derelict fishing gear, entanglement, those kinds of things that are occurring in the ocean would be the focus here. And states are actually already working with NOAA's Marine Debris Program in the Mid-Atlantic, but this would help kind of formalize that effort and have us work together and get some economies of scale in marine debris reduction approaches. So that's all I have for now, and I'll turn it back to Laura Cantrell.
Thank you, Laura McKay. So we're starting to get a few questions, and I think now would be a good time to pause and take one or two, and then we'll keep going. So Laura, I'm just going to pose a couple of questions here. The first one is from Allie Chase. Allie is saying it's important for the federal agencies to commit, to the extent of their existing authorities, to conserve the areas identified as ERAs and REFs. This is envisioned by the National Ocean Policy and is a key step to make sure we improve the health of our oceans. The question is, will any work be done before the plan is sent to the NOC, to the National Ocean Council, to develop guidance to help prevent these areas from impacts they are facing?
Well, that's a tough question, and as a state person, that's particularly tough for me to answer. If any of the federal folks on the line would like to chime in, please do. But as you know, we're just about to release and see together in January the maps that we are getting from our team at Duke on the marine life data analysis. So it's very difficult for folks to understand, what might be appropriate in terms of management in those areas till we see where they are and what's going on in them and get a better understanding of what, if anything, may be causing changes in those areas. So I think it will be difficult to do that, but I don't want to prejudge that. So I would ask if Bob LaBelle or Kevin Chu, if you would like to add anything to that.
Sure. Thanks, Laura. This is Bob LaBelle. Yeah, that's exactly the way I would have phrased the answer. First, we have to sort of identify these areas, and the goal there, of course, is to bring such areas into further discussion among all the entities, not just the federal agencies, but the states and the tribes as well. So getting there is a good effort that's already underway with regard to developing guidance to somehow categorize all these areas and factor that in a general way regionally. That's something that would, if it came at all, would come down the road after we've identified these areas.
Okay, we're going to take one more question and then move on. This question is from Gerhard Puska. And I think this, Laura, this is one for you to field. In terms of high-quality data, where are those data sets coming from? What kind of data sets are they? How does the ocean and coastal observation, monitoring, and prediction figure into this approach of developing and maintaining an understanding of the changing ocean and coastal ecosystems over time? And that may be a complicated and lengthy question or something that you can field pretty quickly with more follow-up to come.
Yeah, I'm just not sure whether Gerhard was referring to the marine life data or something else. Assuming it's the marine life data, that data is coming from a lot of different sources. There are over 3,000 different data layers that have been collected for marine mammals, sea turtles, birds, and fish. The fish data comes from trawl surveys. We know that's not perfect, but it's the best we have available. Sea turtle data comes from a variety of sources. AMAPS is one of them that we're looking at. Marine mammals as well. Lots of different data layers. 80 different scientists have been reviewing those data layers. So I hope that answers the question. If not, send in another question for later for Gerhard.
Okay, great. So we've got a couple of other questions, and we're going to hold on to them for now and hope that we can get back to them during our Q&A session at the end. And just a reminder, operators are standing by, so if you have questions, go ahead and chat them in, and we're collecting them. But for now, we're going to turn to our next several presenters who are going to talk about proposed IJC actions related to the RPB's goal of sustainable ocean uses. And the first person we're going to hear from in this batch will be Doug Simpson. Go ahead, Doug.
Hi, good morning. Next slide, please. So from the framework, we set up two overarching goals regarding commerce and marine navigation. The first is to make sure that marine commerce and navigation data is available for marine planning use. And the second is to raise awareness of the importance, the impact that marine commerce has on national and mid-Atlantic economies. So with that in mind, we set up interjurisdictional coordination actions. Next slide, please. So the first action is to kind of characterize traffic, navigation traffic over time. and we depend a lot on automatic identification system, which I'll call AIS when describing this slide, as the primary data source for what we're using right now to understand marine traffic. Right now we've got a lot of good data that's been synthesized in a usable way up on the MARCO portal, and we'd like to continue putting that data up on the portal. We'd like to make that data more functional, to be able to look at the data seasonally and to be able to see changes from year to year. We'd like to establish a means to ensure that within the AIS data, that the type of vessel that's available in the AIS data is appropriately representing the marine transportation system use in the Mid-Atlantic region. If you go onto the portal right now, you'll see that there are 4 or 5 different types of vessels, but there are more that are available within the AIS data layers. And if we can routinely go and check to make sure that, yes, what we're representing on the portal is an accurate, a reasonable representation of Mid-Atlantic data, then we're doing a good job characterizing what's going up and down the coast. Doing those things should provide 2 outcomes. One is to ensure that our primary maritime traffic patterns are available to people who have to make decisions for other uses. The other is to ensure that shifts in seasonal or long-term navigation patterns are available to decision makers for improving the maritime transportation system. Next slide, please. So when you go to MARCO portal, you'll see that there are great data sets that are up there. We would like to just make sure that there's a process to review the portal data, making sure that new activities that come up, for instance, aquaculture, are represented in data layers. That way we can see how do those layers, how do those new uses impact navigation traffic, and to make sure that existing layers are current. Those goals, that goal would be to make sure that marine commerce decision makers and stakeholders have the best data. What we need for that is a continued data portal and people who can synthesize data, synthesize the raw data in a way to make it usable. Next slide, please. So this next interjurisdictional action is to catalog the intersections between federal agencies and between other RPB entities. So when a new wind farm or a new sand management area is set up, there are permits and processes that make sure that, yes, this coastal area is going to be put to good use. And there are processes right now that discuss the coordination from the state-to-state or between feds and state or between federal entities. And so what we'd like to do is make sure that when it comes to navigation, we understand what all the other sustainable uses are on the ocean and make sure that those permitting processes account for navigation and marine commerce. So we think that we've got pretty good memorandums of agreement and policies in place right now, but to be able to catalog those will give us a better feel for where are we. And then once we've got a good handle on what exists right now, we can identify if there are any gaps in processes that we might be able to make available to entities to improve their work. Next slide, please. So the Panama Canal has recently concluded its expansion, and that has driven ships to become wider and deeper. For the United States to be able to keep up, we have to deepen and widen our port areas. So there's activity up and down the Mid-Atlantic coast to make our ports more accessible to international shipping. So it's important to stakeholders all along the coast to make sure we understand what are the implications of these new, bigger vessels. With that, although the ports themselves may be getting deeper and wider, there are offshore approaches in the coastal zone that may impact the ability for these larger vessels to get into the newly deepened or widened ports. So what we'd like to do is catalog where is activity happening within the ports, and then where would we foresee traffic maybe having to be rerouted based on their offshore approaches. Our goal with this is to make sure that decision makers have data needed to optimize the marine transportation system post-Panamax. Next slide, please. So the Coast Guard has recently conducted a study for marine traffic routing along the mid-Atlantic coast and actually along the entire Atlantic coast. We anticipate that that will be published sometime by or before February of 2016, and there will be a comment period involved. Now, this particular access route study considers the intersection between marine commerce and offshore wind. So we've specifically looked at that scenario. In addition to looking at the intersections between wind and marine commerce, we also have planning guidelines that might be applicable to more than just the intersection of shipping and wind. So we look forward to having folks comment on our Atlantic Coast Port Access Route study once it's published. Look for that coming out in the next few months. Next slide, please. And then finally, up and down the mid-Atlantic, we have harbor safety committees that look at regional, sub-regional areas and how we can improve navigation and marine commerce. Additionally, at the national level, we have federal advisory committees that we may be able to reach out to. We just like to make sure that the plan has coordinating functions in place that allow the regions to work together as they address offshore things that span their regions and the ability to reach up to the national level FACA committees. And that's all I have for marine commerce and navigation.
Thank you, Doug. So we're going to keep going here, and Bob LaBelle, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you will take up two topics. First, offshore wind, and then offshore sand management. So off to you, Bob.
Okay, thank you, Laura. So let's go to the next slide. I want to acknowledge the co-lead on this with the New York Department of State. So the framework goal and objective there is that it's to provide for facilitate greater collaboration around ocean energy issues in the mid-Atlantic with states, tribes, and federal partners. And the RPB intends to provide the means for decision makers to implement their programs and authorities in an integrated way, such as through enhanced interagency coordination. While the framework outlines ocean energy in a larger sense, RPB members have chosen to focus on offshore wind energy in the Ocean Action Plan. Next slide. So this slide describes the RPB's desired outcomes and output, which include a more efficient, predictable, and informed process that supports effective coordination, more meaningful participation for affected states in a shorter time frame, and enhanced agency management and environmental and regulatory review processes while advancing state, tribal, and federal wind energy development objectives. Next slide. This slide shows our updated proposed IJC action, and there are basically three categories, which I will address in the 3 slides following this one. Responsible entities will actively work to increase coordination and develop a more informed process, including intersections of federal programs and statutes. There will be specific actions such as developing agency guidance on best practices for using the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Data Portal in management, environmental, and regulatory reviews. And we will partner in ongoing and planned studies to identify knowledge gaps and increase access to research planning cycles. Next slide. Now, the first category is coordination and management. So this shows some steps that we will take, such as to develop a more informed process. So we're going to increase collaboration and participation in wind energy processes by developing clearly designed coordination mechanisms. We'll leverage existing networks such as BOEM's Intergovernmental Renewable Energy State Task Forces to recommend ways to avoid siting issues and other conflicts. And we'll develop clearly defined coordination mechanisms to inform site assessment and project construction plans and ensure activities are mutually reinforcing and provide the necessary information for decision-making where these statutes intersect. We're going to create a chart of leasing, environmental review, and regulatory processes to identify intersections and how programs intersect, who is involved, and when in the process, and outline where and when relevant authorities play a role in decisions. And BOEM will be posting that up on its own website, and we'll link to it through the portal, hopefully. Next slide. The second category is use of data. And we'll use data to identify knowledge gaps, develop agency guidance and best practices that address how the data will be used in management, environmental, and regulatory reviews. We'll be seeking agency commitments to using Mid-Atlantic Data Portal to support NEPA analyses and consultations. We'll look into putting links to agency announcements on the data portal about proposed or development activities. And we'll continue the dialogue with states to look for opportunities and mechanisms to share information early in the review process. We're going to form small teams to further discuss options, and we'll agree on what data is sufficient for responsible entities to use for their reviews. Collaborate on shared data sets, for example, the Mid-Atlantic Data Portal potentially linking with BOEM's new georeference study system called GeoESPIS, and that's to access environmental reports. Data sharing through GeoESPIS will provide the ability to readily discover relevant scientific information and data analyses to make informed decisions. And we'll coordinate data collection for environmental assessment to inform development of new offshore renewable energy projects. And we're also going to make efforts to better engage the fishing industry through specific mechanisms and improved data sharing. Next slide. The third category is studies and research, and we intend to partner in ongoing and planned studies and increase access to research planning cycles. For example, BOEM will engage states and tribes earlier in the process of developing our research agenda every year. BOEM will solicit and consider state, tribal, and public input to the annual national studies list, coupled with the mechanisms to make this happen. We'll identify opportunities for collaboration with the National Oceanographic Partnership Program to create an integrated regional ocean research agenda, and we're doing this in concert with other federal agencies. And that will then facilitate discussions to assess interest among federal agencies on common topics. If the partners find common interest, the program can also provide support for the funding announcements and the proposal review process. Next slide, please. This is a word on implementation. The White House is establishing an interagency offshore wind working group that will ensure effective offshore wind energy coordination among federal agencies. In addition to consultation with tribes during Section 106 reviews, BOEM has developed 4 Atlantic Section 106 programmatic agreements with tribal partners for each stage of BOEM's renewable energy process. Involving tribal partners helps better understand renewable energy leasing impacts for economics and the environment, marine mammals, sacred ceremonial sites, and cultural resources. BOEM was also inviting tribal partners to be cooperating agencies in preparing BOEM NEPA documents, where tribes can prepare sections, provide data and input before public comment periods, help develop alternatives, and estimate the effects of alternatives. Next slide, please. On stakeholder input, broader stakeholder input opportunities include requesting feedback from stakeholders through December 9th. This is a Federal Register notice that we published on September 30th. And this is asking for information about how BOEM is doing with regard to its offshore wind energy program. We're seeking input from industry and other stakeholders, including state and local agencies, on potential challenges to continued development. The feedback will inform BOEM's strategic planning efforts, and the information received will be used in determining whether or how BOEM should change its existing renewable energy processes, including regulations. And just on this Thursday, December 10th, the Department of Energy and Department of the Interior are holding a workshop to obtain stakeholder insight into the technical and market challenges associated with and potential pathways to facilitate the development of the offshore wind industry in the United States. The workshop seeks input across the range of offshore wind stakeholders to better inform efforts to update and refine the 2011 DOE report titled National Offshore Wind Strategy. I think that's my last slide on wind. And Laura, should I go right into sand?
Yes, please do.
Okay, take a sip here. So, the framework goal, well, I wanted to point out that BOEM's the federal co-champion for these actions, along with New York Department of State and Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. So the framework goal there, the sand management objectives falls under the framework's sustainable ocean uses goal to plan and provide for existing and emerging ocean uses in a sustainable manner that minimizes conflicts, improves effectiveness and regulatory predictability, and supports economic growth. So what we're talking about here is offshore sand resources in federal waters 3 miles and out that could be used for coastal projects such as beach nourishment, et cetera. Next slide. So responsible RPB member entities, along with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, will work to facilitate enhanced participation among coastal jurisdictions, federal and state regulatory agencies, and tribal entities to identify and prioritize the use of sand and gravel resources for coastal adaptation, resilience planning, and implementation. The RPB intends to provide the means for decision makers to implement their programs and authorities in an integrated way, such as through enhanced interagency coordination. Next slide. Regarding outcomes output, the desired outcomes listed, which are enhanced intergovernmental coordination to share data and help identify sand resource projects, and facilitate coordination among stakeholders with offshore wind, sand, and fisheries interests. Next slide. So the slide describes the updated proposed offshore sand management actions. Responsible RPB member entities will actively work to support plan restoration and resilience projects, support sustainable management of offshore sand resources by identifying best practices, and inform decision-making by sharing data. And we'll consider using existing sand projects, such as renourishment efforts in Virginia, as pilot demonstrations on how RPB efforts might be of assistance in these contentious activities. Next slide. This slide shows the coordination and management steps, which include coordination for sand renourishment projects during the planning and analysis phase for NEPA consultation by BOEM and the Corps of Engineers. And also identifying locations and characterizations of potential sand borrow areas offshore the mid-Atlantic states. Sharing, we also are going to be sharing a BOEM geospatial database, which will contain data from cooperative agreements, leases and agreements, and new data being collected from the Hurricane Sandy funded Atlantic Sand Assessment Project. and with identifying data gaps to be addressed with future resource evaluation studies. For example, BOEM has 5 marine mineral studies proposed for FY 2016, and we are setting up bi-monthly calls starting in January with the Corps of Engineers, New York, and New Jersey about the sand project development process for immediate sand needs in the next 3 to 5 year time frame, as well as needs in the more distant future. Next slide, please. On use of data, I mentioned BOEM's geospatial database. It contains data from over 20 years of cooperative agreements, nearly 13 leases and agreements, and new data being collected from the Hurricane Sandy funded ASAP project. And this database will be linked to the portal and will inform decision making. We'll share the data model with states when it is available in FY 2017. As we gather the data, we just had a year-long cruise to observe the data, and we're pulling that together. In addition, we're going to work to better engage the fishing industry through specific mechanisms and improved data sharing. Next slide. And we heard that loud and clear in many of the public meetings and input opportunities. Now, regarding studies and research, we intend to partner in ongoing and planned studies, and we'll engage states earlier in the process of developing BOEM's research agendas, as well as tribes. We'll consider state and tribal input, as well as public input for the annual national studies list, as I mentioned with WIN, and we'll be enhancing the mechanisms to make this happen, such as outreach, webinars, announcements on data portals, and websites. BOEM will identify opportunities for collaboration, again, through the National Ocean Partnership Program, much as I discussed in WIN, and the goal will be to create an integrated regional ocean research agenda and perhaps have some partners to do some substantive research in the region. Next slide. On implementation, we are now working to establish a Mid-Atlantic Regional Sand Management Working Group that will meet for the first time early next year. This group will discuss needs for offshore federal sand, data, and future environmental study needs. We'll discuss regional environmental issues related to offshore dredging and address local government and nearshore issues. And again, we have those 5 mineral studies that I think planned for fiscal 2016 through the Environmental Studies Program. Next slide. We wanted to comment on stakeholder input that we've received over the past months in this area. In proposing these draft actions, we considered public input from the Marco Stakeholder Workshop, which included suggestions to develop best management practices for coastal sand mining with respect to fisheries and monitor their success, increase participation of the Corps of Engineers in the RPB process, improve the use of essential fish habitat consultation processes, and better coordinate among stakeholders with wind, sand, and fishing interests. So not to exclude other interests out there, but there's a clear message that more collaboration and cooperation is needed between the fishing community and the agencies that are working on beach nourishment and offshore sand. I think that's it on the sand slides. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Bob. So I suggest that we take a pause here. A few more questions have come in that are related to the topics that you've just heard about, maritime commerce and navigation, and the offshore wind and offshore sand. So, Doug, first question I think is for you to field. It's from Sarah Chasis. Will there be an opportunity for the Atlantic Coast Port Access Route Study to take account of the ERAs that are identified through the RPB process?
So when it comes to, from what I've seen from initial drafts of the study, is that it has not taken that into account. But what we're hoping for is feedback from stakeholders telling us, hey, how can we improve this study? What are areas that we missed? So I would encourage the person who submitted the question to get that comment, get that question on the docket.
All right. great. So, so Sarah, maybe you can do that kind of follow-up. All right, so next is a question from Ann Merwin. Bob, this is on wind energy. Are there items addressing intergovernmental coordination and data use, but nothing focused on stakeholder engagement beyond fishermen engagement? Separately, you discussed getting input on stakeholder engagement through the current offshore wind comment period in this week's workshop. Is it the intent to add more IJC actions focusing on stakeholder engagement based on the feedback received during these two events?
Sure. So on the last one, I think, yes, our intent is certainly to get more input. And as we go forward, you know, after this discussion today, we're going to be reaching out to sectors that work in this area and the public as well. With regard to the first item about other than fishing interests, that's probably my fault. I did try to indicate that while we wanted to emphasize fishing and offshore sand and wind interactions, by no means are we turning our back or reducing our efforts for other industries and interested parties out there. So that was, you know, my problem on presenting that.
Okay, so I'm just going to offer one. We've got several, and we don't have time to take them all right now, so we'll table them for our Q&A session. But, Bob, we have a comment from Matt Gov that you may want to respond to, so here's the comment. I'm hearing a lot of language that sounds like we are back to, quote, plan for the plan. I think in some circumstances that approach is warranted, but if all we get in the OAP is talk of future planning, we have wasted a huge opportunity to make ocean management work better for all youth sectors. We need some specific actions in the OAP that all RPB members can start working towards immediately after the final plan is approved.
Well, I know that's a common sentiment in some quarters. I tend to look at it the other way. I think this Ocean Action Plan is a huge step forward with regard to how the RPB entities are going to be working together in the future. And I think it opens the door for much better collaboration and better project reviews, better ocean protection in the future. Laying the groundwork for this thing hasn't been easy. I know that some of the language on the slide sounds like planning for planning's sake, but we did a lot of that maybe a year ago. But in BOEM right now, we're talking to the folks that write the environmental documents, that have to go to the Secretary of the Interior and recommend where to go and what to do and what not to do. And those are the folks that are buying into the concept of the data portal. BOEM has spent millions and millions of dollars on ocean research, and we're going to make sure that that data is accessible through the portal and that everyone should be using that data who wants to weigh in on these topics. Likewise, our environmental analysts will be better served with you know, more information easily accessible through the portal. The personal relationships that have been gained in the Mid-Atlantic region among federal, state, and tribal partners is something that shouldn't be ignored. If we have a controversial project coming down the road, they'll be the first people that we call, and things will proceed in a much better way. So I don't share that negative aspect. I think that you'll see specifics coming out of that, but the groundwork has to be laid first, and that's what we're doing.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move on. The next topic you're going to hear about is fisheries science and management, and Kevin Chu, you're up.
Thank you, Laura, and good afternoon to everybody. I really appreciate people giving us your time and your perspective on what we're trying to accomplish. I'm going to talk a little bit about fishing collaboration. I want to start by acknowledging my co-partner, Mike Louisi. Mike works for the state of Maryland, but he's the regional, the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council's representative to the RPB. He can't be on this call because the council is meeting as we speak, and he will be raising the RPB and its activities to the Council on Thursday morning, and expects to ask the Council specifically to endorse working more closely with the regional planning body, both to ensure that a broader perspective is brought into fisheries management, but also to ensure that the fisheries perspective is brought into other activities as well. Can I have the next slide, please? The objectives and the goals are taken straight from the regional planning documents, and so I won't really go into them. You've seen other slides mentioning these activities as well. I will say that what we are trying to do is to take specific, discrete and practical steps to improve interjurisdictional collaboration. These are things that we are going to implement now. We are not going to really wait for the National Ocean Council to approve the plan before we start moving forward with at least some of these things. So what we're trying to do is find very specific activities that we can accomplish now to broaden the collaboration. Can I have the next slide? We're proposing 7 different actions that we hope will improve interjurisdictional collaboration. 5 of these, those who were at the September meeting will be familiar with. They haven't significantly changed. But 2 of them are as a result of the advice we heard from stakeholders, both in September and then also at a MARCO stakeholder liaison meeting in November. Numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7 are the ones that you've seen before. 5 and 6 are the new ones. I don't know why the order ended up that way. Don't ask me about that stuff. It's all in the bureaucracy. Next slide, please. So I want to remind people that there is a lot of collaboration already going on. The Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission and the Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Management Council both have state and federal representatives on board. Various one moment, I just lost my screen. Well, we have a number of organizations that already by law collaborate to bring people together. And so again, what we're trying to do is not reinvent the wheel, not duplicate efforts, but rather to enhance the efforts that are already going on, and if need be, to find new activities and new ways to collaborate, but again, not to reinvent the wheel. Could I have the next slide, please? So I'm just going to step quickly through some of these proposed actions because people have seen them already. One, to ensure that we collaborate better with the states, we are proposing to meet at least once a year for a day-long meeting with the state fisheries directors and NOAA leadership. That's going to improve relationships, make sure that we know of each other's concerns and start planning farther in advance for actions that we know are coming down the pike that are of concern to our partners. Next slide, please. We are proposing to collaborate better on the science of climate change and how it affects fisheries. The Northeast Fisheries Science Center is developing, as we speak, a regional action plan on climate science, and it is at least contemplating hosting a workshop with the states and other scientific organizations to identify key areas of scientific research to help us all prepare better for climate change. This is not a new concept. The Mid-Atlantic Council hosted a workshop not too long ago, and other groups have done the same, but the science is changing constantly. It's always being updated, and we can all work better together if we meet more often to discuss what we know about climate change and to use that knowledge to prepare for the future. Next slide, please. The specific request that Mike Louisi intends to make on Thursday to the Council is that the Council, the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council, invite the RPB to participate on its advisory panel. The Council has a committee on ecosystem and ocean planning. And that committee has been very effective. It's got a wide array of viewpoints already on it. Just yesterday, it adopted a series of position statements about best practices for non-fishing impacts or managing non-fishing impacts on the ocean, and it will start to take up a discussion of fishing impacts on the environment in the near future, and it's an ideal forum for the RPB to engage in. Next slide, please. We wanted to have a specific action to improve collaboration with the tribes. They really have not been as engaged as we would have preferred to have them engage in the fishery management process. And so NOAA is proposing to meet, at least to offer to meet with the tribes. We don't want to force the tribes to engage if they are too busy or have higher priorities, but we will offer to meet with each of the tribes, the federally recognized tribes, to just discuss perspectives and get to know each other better. Okay, next slide, please. So this action is one of the ones that we heard from constituents in September. They wanted a way in which we would get the fishing community more engaged in ocean management. And so we are proposing that the RPB make a specific commitment to discuss this. And Matt, this is perhaps a plan to plan. We don't know exactly how the RPB will resolve this question, but our first step is to get the RPB to commit to talking about and discussing ways to do two things. One is to reflect the fisher's knowledge in ocean planning and data products. And there's some of that already going on with the data portal, but it can be improved. And also ways to alert fishermen to upcoming ocean management projects. Next slide, please. And then apparently we heard in September that there was an effort, that there was an interest in improving collaboration on essential fish habitat. That one went right over my head, I confess, but we heard it again in November at the MARCO Liaison Committee. And so we are proposing a couple of different ways in which we can strengthen collaboration on essential fish habitat. And we intend to work with the Mid-Atlantic Council staff to improve our collaboration on their preparations for essential fish habitat documents, and that was approved yesterday at the council meeting. And we also intend to host training sessions for other agencies such as the Army Corps of Engineers, and as you heard Bob say, for the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management on how to use essential fish habitat criteria. Next slide, please. So the last of the proposed actions is that we propose to get to know the interests and perspectives of recreational fishermen better. This is an area where I think the National Marine Fisheries Service has failed in the past. We're really trying to rectify that. We intend for our first, our concrete action that we will take is we will host a workshop, or we will participate in a workshop. We are not actually hosting it, although we're funding it, with recreational leaders to understand their perspectives and also to explain the fisheries management process and how that works. In addition, we'll be developing a unilateral recreational fishing action plan, but that's not an RPB process. All right, next slide. Yeah, so I don't really need to go into this. This is a project of NOAA plus all of, or at least many of the federal agencies and states and tribes, and we welcome stakeholder comments. And I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. We're going to go to our next topic, which is tribal uses, and Kelsey Leonard, the Shinnecock Indian Nation and our RPB tribal co-lead, is going to cover this topic. Go ahead, Kelsey.
Thank you, Laura. So everyone, for tribal uses, I just want to acknowledge the other co-champions for this action item, Kevin Chu with NOAA and Catherine McCormick from the Pamunkey Indian Tribe. Next slide. So from the framework, the goal pertaining to interjurisdictional coordination for tribal uses is to recognize and respect the right of tribal nations to free, prior, and informed consent while taking into account important tribal uses and submerged cultural resources in the planning process. Within that, we have increased coordination amongst tribes, states, and federal entities for integrated management efforts, and to document and foster shared understanding of ocean and coastal sites and beliefs and values related to the Mid-Atlantic. Next slide, please. So within those objectives, we have an overview of some of our proposed actions. One, to identify best practices for increased coordination amongst tribes, states, and federal entities. Our second action is to improve the ability of RPB entities to use traditional knowledge for planning, management, and decision-making purposes. And our third action item is to identify data gaps pertaining to tribal uses and develop a research agenda to address those needs. Next slide. So within our first action item, we want to look at best practices for consultation. This is also a with the Northeast Regional Planning Body and their tribal co-lead as well to identify, review, and if appropriate, suggest updates to tribal consultation policies as they pertain to ocean planning. So these are consultation policies within the federal entities as well as state entities and even the fishery management councils. So a review of those policies as they currently stand. The desired outcome is that there would be a more comprehensive consultation policies that can contribute to coordination amongst tribes and states and federal entities in the RPB. Next slide, please. So with our we also are looking to develop a tribal and agency marine planning contact directories. The outcome for this is we recognize that communication between tribes is often difficult, and so hopefully having a contact directory will enable increased coordination and alleviate some of those obstacles that tribes and other state and federal entities are currently facing in terms of communication. We're also looking to work with tribes within the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. I'm getting some comments that I might be breaking up a bit. Can you hear me now?
Just then you were stronger, but you've been breaking up.
Okay. I guess if at a point in time it becomes unrecognizable, please let me know, and I apologize. There doesn't seem to be much I can do. So
so keep going.
Okay, the next action item being to assist tribes with the development of a tribal ocean planning network. We've realized that coordination and engagement of tribes in the regional planning body has been difficult, so that tribal ocean planning network is a way to assist in that development of continued and sustained engagement. We next are looking for federal and state RPB entities to commit to seeking informal meetings with tribal government officials The purpose is to share perspectives, discuss best practices for consultation, and to increase the engagement of traditional knowledge holders in the planning process. Really, this is about reconciliation and developing trust. Next slide, please. We also are then hoping to develop best practices for identifying and incorporating traditional knowledge into the planning process. We recognize that traditional knowledge of tribes and of other holders is necessary and needed in planning, but we often don't know how to operationalize that. So this action item is looking to develop best practices to do so. Next slide. We then have data and research, and we're hoping to identify data gaps pertaining to tribal uses by continuing to conduct, we've already done a few, but making this a part of the Ocean Action Plan to continue to conduct participatory GIS workshops that will enable us to develop a tribal use research agenda, a tribal needs research agenda, and a submerged cultural resources research agenda. The desired outcome is to place tribal data on the Marco portal and other regional, state, or federal planning portals as approved by tribes, with the caveat that this data is solely for the purposes of ocean planning and not to be used in other instances. Next slide, please. And ideally, all of these action items are to support an understanding and a culture for regional ocean planning that honors the inherent sovereignty, sovereign status and reserve rights of tribes, that recognizes state and federal trust responsibilities, that supports tribes in pursuing the vitality of their culture and economy as these relate to the ocean, that promotes collaborative ocean and cultural resource management, that supports and looks towards the integration and operationalization of traditional knowledge, and that respects tribal connections to the water, and ultimately seeks to enhance and maintain important relationships amongst tribes, the fisheries management councils, state and federal agencies participating within the RPB. So thank you, and I look forward to any of your questions.
Thank you, Kelsey. So we have a question that's related to the last couple of topics that we took up. This is a question, Kevin, for you from Sarah Chases. It's a comment. We're glad to see attention to essential fish habitat consultation process. However, rather than just investigating that process, we recommend that the work group develop specific recommended IJC measures to strengthen that process.
Yeah, so thank you to Sarah for that comment. And I think that's really what ultimately the RPB will be aiming to do, is look for specific ways to strengthen it, although those two activities that I proposed are aimed at strengthening the process. We intend to work more closely to strengthen the Mid-Atlantic Council's EFH process and train the practitioners in other agencies that are required to consult with us. So that's the purpose of those kinds of actions, and there may be others, and I would love to hear other thoughts of specific things that we can do within the context of the law, of course, to strengthen EFH. And the alternative is strengthening the law, which we can't really do. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks to all. We're going to move on to, we still have a few topics that we want to get through, and I'm going to turn now to Joe Atangan with Joint Staff for the U.S. Fleet Forces to talk about national security.
Good afternoon, everybody. Our objectives in the national security interjurisdictional coordination actions are relatively simple. We want to ensure that national security interests in the Mid-Atlantic are accounted for through the enhanced coordination, increased transparency, and sharing of information across agencies. These interests that we're talking about are proposed actions and activities above on and below the ocean surface that may impact military training and testing ranges, as well as the approaches to these ranges and these bases. Our desired outcome is to establish an efficient, informed process that supports effective coordination. We want to leverage existing processes, practices, programs, and facilitate addressing of national security impacts and concerns throughout agency management and environmental and regulatory review processes. Next slide, please. To do so, we're looking at focusing in a number of areas, the first of which is in the coordination and management aspect. As I mentioned, we want to leverage existing processes, practices, programs, and groups to assess the potential national security impacts of proposed actions. We want to identify potential mitigations and facilitate decision-making processes. As you can imagine, the DoD is a rather sizable organization, and there are many branches of the services that may be participating in these military ranges. So we want to leverage the existing programs that are out there already. Included in these are the Navy at-Sea Environmental Compliance Program, which includes the Atlantic Fleet Training and Testing Environmental Impact Statements, Phase 3, which is to be complete in the summer 2008, so the analyses and the studies are going on now, as well as the Integrated Comprehensive Monitoring Plan that we have with regard to marine mammals. As far as the coordination with the existing task force and planning groups, some of these include task force that have been mentioned already by Bob and others, which include the Wind Energy Task Force, the Office of the Secretary of Defense Clearinghouse, which works very closely with the Wind Energy Task Force, the Area Maritime Security Committees, which are individual harbor security committees that we work with the Coast Guard, and the Navy's Ocean Observing System Security Group, which deals with ocean observing systems, specifically buoys and listening devices that may be placed in the vicinity of our operating ranges. Next slide, please. An important aspect of this is making sure that we're operating from the same data. So our goal is to identify authoritative, publicly releasable data for use in management and environmental regulatory reviews. It's important that we are looking at the same picture. Navy is in the process of providing national security data layers and the metadata to the Mid-Atlantic portal, as well as the Northeast portal. Included in these layers are our op area boundaries, submarine transit lanes, and other areas of interest. Next slide, please. Among the issue areas, we want to focus on the compatibility issues and potential impacts of national security. In many cases, organizations don't know who to contact or national security doesn't even rise to the level of interest, and they don't know until the very end that there is, in fact, a national security interest. So what we want to do is identify a path for these entities that are proposing these activities to coordinate with DoD to review for national security impacts. We want to include these points of contacts within the data portal, hopefully embedded within the metadata for these various layers, so that if activities or infrastructure is being proposed in those areas, that they know who to contact for and coordinate. Examples of those is we have an organization we know as Fleet Activities FastFacts Bay Caves for activities within the Virginia Capes operating area as well as the Northeast operating areas. We have the Navy Seafloor Cable Protection Office for activities in the area of cable laying. These are important points of contact that can help deconflict many of the activities proposed or otherwise within the military training and testing ranges. Next slide, please. As far as member entity and stakeholder involvement, we're working closely with our partners in the U.S. Coast Guard as well as others within DoD to ensure that we know the right folks to deconflict with proposed actions. We continue with our stakeholder engagement with by seeking input from the Department of Defense's regional environmental coordinators who have routine interaction with the communities they're involved with, as well as the Secretary of Defense Clearinghouse, as well as intergovernmental task force and targeted stakeholders. And that concludes my portion of the brief.
Thank you, Joe. All right, we're going to go to our next speaker, who is Liz Semple with New Jersey, who's going to talk about non-consumptive recreation. Liz?
Thank you, and good afternoon. So can you go to the next slide, please? The RPB objectives from the framework for non-consumptive recreational use are to account for the importance of nearshore and offshore non-consumptive recreational use and their local and regional economic contributions in the mid-Atlantic. We want to make sure in the management of other ocean uses and resources that the non-consumptive recreational use impacts are considered. Next slide, please. While most user groups, fishing, wind, sand, commercial vessels, have primary representative groups and primary agencies governing their activities, non-consumptive recreation typically has neither. Thus, this economically significant sector might not be adequately considered nor consulted in various ocean planning decisions. The intent of including non-consumptive recreation in the OAP is to raise awareness of the value of non-consumptive recreational uses to coastal communities and empower entities in making decisions which potentially affect these uses. We would like to make sure that occurs by continuing to collect data and information about non-consumptive recreational uses. Next slide, please. We would like to, in the collection of data, also identify potential impacts and use conflicts to these high-value areas. The maps that you're seeing are from the Marco portal and the current data that is available. We would like to do this as an RPB by forming a work group and having this work group work closely or be provided assistance from stakeholders. Next slide, please. The work group would be charged, besides getting data, to identify and catalog current federal, state, tribal processes, authorities, and regulations which influence non-consumptive recreational uses. We want to ensure that there is an understanding of what the authorities are and if we're most effectively using them at the federal and the state and the tribal layers. Next slide, please. Once we have a catalog of all of these authorities and processes, we want to review them and see if there needs to be improvements. Next slide, please. Because this sector is diffuse, we want to hold workshops in each of the states if possible and resources are available to identify if we've missed any non-consumptive recreational uses or high-value areas and make sure that all of that information is made available on the Marco portal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Liz. And a question has just come in that you can field from Margaret Flanagan, who's asking what are some specific examples of non-consumptive recreational uses?
Non-consumptive recreational uses are surfing, boating, whale watching, birding, diving, sightseeing. There's quite a number of them.
All right, thank you. So we have a couple more topics that are related to IJC actions that we want to get through. we want to hear about the data portal from Laura McKay and the Coastal Zone Management Act from David Kaiser. And then I suggest that we also, Gwen, you just follow David and give folks a quick update about stakeholder engagement, and then we'll have our remaining time to take up questions. So, Laura McKay, you're up.
Okay, thank you, Laura Cantrell. As we've been talking, I hope it's been evident to you that data is critical to our Mid-Atlantic ocean planning effort, and that the portal is really the key tool that we have available to help us with all of these actions. So next slide, please. So it's basically 4 things that we want to keep an eye on here for the portal. One is just to maintain the operational components that we have, all of the data development management and the web maintenance. And so that's just keeping it up and running. The second thing we want to do is to really expand our public engagement to enhance the data and functionality. And an example of that is something that's happening tomorrow, actually, at the Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Management Council meeting. We're having an open house to show the fish data that's going into the marine life data analysis. We're fully aware that the data that's being used, the trawl surveys, has limitations. We're asking the commercial fishermen to help us write what all of those limitations are so that people understand that when they view this data, what the limitations are, and also to get input from them about how we can improve that data. And we've already gotten some good feedback. We know they like to have NEMAP type data collected where you have a fisherman on board with the trawl to help identify key places to look and so forth. So we want to expand that sort of public engagement to enhance the data, and that could apply to various data layers. The third item is to review and add new data and mapping products as they evolve. There's always continuing research going on, always new data layers, and it's going to be critical to keep those updated in the portal and getting new features and layers in there. And then finally, the last one, which is the most critically important action for us to focus on, is to transition this portal from its current short-term funding, just year to year, to a long-term stable source of funding. And that is going to be a hard nut to crack, but we need to somehow pool resources among the federal agencies and possibly states to make sure that we have staff in place for a long period of time so that this portal is always available and useful for ocean planning into the future. One last thing, since I think I might have a couple extra minutes, I failed to mention in the HOE actions, the last one when I was talking about marine debris, I just wanted to let folks know that the Virginia CZM program is hosting a Marine Debris Summit March 7th through 9th at VIMS in Gloucester Point, Virginia Institute of Marine Science. And we hope to have a half-day dedicated to a session on regional marine debris reduction. So I just want to let folks know if they're interested to look at our website for details on that coming up. But I will leave it at that and turn it back to you, Laura.
Thank you, Laura. So next we're going to hear from David Kaiser, who's with the Office for Coastal Management at NOAA, who is going to talk about the Coastal Zone Management Act. David.
Great, thanks. Next slide, please. Okay, so over the past year or so, there have been many discussions on how a regional planning body and a regional ocean plan can be used to enhance the Coastal Zone Management Act federal consistency process. And, for those who don't know, so federal consistency is the Coastal Zone Management Act provision that allows states to review federal actions, even federal actions in federal waters, that may affect the uses and resources of a state's coastal zone. And in October of this year, NOAA released a draft discussion paper talking about how the Regional Ocean Planning Effort and Coastal Zone Management Act could help each other out. And what we focused on are some potential action items under 3 categories. Next slide. So these have been discussed among the federal agencies and with the coastal states and the regional planning bodies. And they right now are looking at 3 primary activities. One is enhancing federal notice to states and tribes. And so this would be a way for states, tribes, and others to find out about potential federal actions affecting coastal uses or resources in a more timely fashion. And so we're looking at the potential use of the data portal. That could be set up in a certain way to post notices, and then also to provide automatic notification to folks, and then also potentially state and tribal listservs that the federal agencies would use. The second item is using the data portal as a means to help folks make a better coastal effects determination. So that could be an applicant needing to evaluate coastal effects, could be a federal agency, but really focusing on how a state can use the Regional Ocean Plan and the data portal to make better coastal effects analyses and what we call causal connections between a proposed action and impacts to coastal uses or resources. The second item there under that is also looking at options for, and this gets a little technical, but for identifying geographic areas in federal waters where certain federal actions would be subject to CZMA federal consistency review. And the third category of activities we're looking at is using NOAA's existing regulations for states and federal agencies to see if there may be some agreements that could be reached to exclude some federal actions from further CZMA review because they don't need to be done all the time, or because they may be minor in scope, or to establish thresholds or conditions where an activity would or could not be subject to state CZMA review. Next slide. And so what we're looking at is, given the time frame of the Ocean Action Plan and the regional ocean plans, is establishing general objectives for these, and then probably working out the logistics and the details of these as we go along and after the Ocean Action Plan is finalized. And to do that, we will establish a working group of federal, state, tribal, CZMA folks to look at these issues and some of the hurdles we might have to overcome and some of the negotiations that would have to occur to make these happen, and also to make sure that whatever is agreed to meets NOAA's Coastal Zone Management Act regulatory requirements, including those for public participation. And so this work group will be facilitated by my office as we move forward. And I think that's it.
Thank you, David. So let's take a question for David from Sarah Chasis. Sarah's asking, on page 12 of the CZM consistency discussion paper that you referred to, you say that not all impacts to a coastal use or resource result in a, quote, coastal effect that would trigger a consistency review. Could you please explain that?
Sure. So you have activities that may be occurring offshore in federal waters, whether it's 5 miles offshore or 20 miles offshore, and you might have an impact. So you might have an activity that temporarily means that a whale swims over there instead of over there, or that commercial fishing isn't really impacted in terms of its ability to fish, but might be, you know, for a very short temporary period, have to avoid a certain area or something. And the idea is that every impact that occurs out there, whether to a coastal use or to a coastal resource, doesn't rise to the level of what we call a coastal effect. meaning that the use of the resource is not being impacted in such a way that rises to that what we call a coastal effect.
All right, thank you. So our last presentation is Glenn Schultz, who is going to give you a sense of some upcoming stakeholder engagement opportunities. And Glenn, off to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So on the next slide, you're going to see a list of upcoming stakeholder engagement activities. So first on this list is a great opportunity to learn about the ecological and human use data synthesis products that were described earlier by Laura McKay and the Regional Ocean Assessment. So during this event that was got scheduled for January 29th in Dewey Beach, Delaware, the MARCO contractors will present their products and be available to answer questions. We'll be posting information, more about the logistics on the MARCO website in early January. So then in early 2016, the RPB will be drafting various chapters of the draft Ocean Action Plan that will be discussed during our next in-person meeting scheduled for late March. And as we work through the draft, especially looking at further refinement of these interjurisdictional coordination activities, RPB members will continue targeted outreach and engagement with stakeholders. And you heard a few examples of those today, whether it was reaching out to harbor safety committees, wind energy task forces, and the fishing community, just to name a few. Then during the March RPB meeting, we're going to encourage stakeholders to attend and formally submit comments during the designated public comment sessions. But backed by popular demand, the RPB is also going to host a workshop the day before the meeting, similar to what we did during the last one. It was really well received, and that's going to provide an opportunity for a better dialogue between RPB members and the workshop participants. And moving on, the draft Ocean Action Plan will be released in mid-June for a 45-day public comment period. And to facilitate engagement during that public comment period, we'll be sponsoring a webinar similar to today, and then holding a series of public listening sessions throughout the region. And just as we do on a regular basis, anyone interested in submitting, comments through our online system is also able to do that at any time. And then finally, in September, we will be holding our last kind of in-person meeting when we finalize the Ocean Action Plan before submitting it. And at that time, we'll also be providing an opportunity for stakeholder engagement and public comment. So that's just a quick overview of some of the opportunities for engagement that we have already identified, and we encourage you to reach out to us if you see other ways and opportunities that we can help facilitate that engagement. So with that, Laura, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you, Glenn. And so stay tuned for more information about all of those events that Glenn referenced. Your engagement is important to the RPB, and really hope that you'll take advantage of all of those opportunities. There is a question from Noah Chessman about stakeholder engagement, Glenn, so let me just pose it here. Is the RPB planning to reach out to the scientific community to review the MDAT outputs during the January to March 2016 time period, and if so, how?
Okay, what I'm going to do is pass that to Laura McKay, who has been our point person on that.
Okay, on the January 29th meeting, that scientists can certainly come. I just wanted to remind folks that, as I mentioned earlier, there's been more than 80 scientists involved as that data has been being developed by the MDAT team. So there has been a lot of rigorous scientific review already, but certainly anyone who's interested would be invited to attend that presentation January 29th.
All right, and Matt Gov is asking, will there be evening components to the listening session similar to the last round of sessions?
Matt, we have not yet really thought through the public listening session. We need to figure out first what kind of resources that we have, so that will help us identify, whether we will, how many of them that we'll be having, and whether they will, be in each of the states or not. But we have heard your request, and if we can, we think it'd probably be a great idea to both get those folks that can come during the day, but those that are working and can't. So, we acknowledge your request, and we're just going to have to figure out the finances and the logistics.
Okay, so as you can tell from the slide, we're at our question and comment portion of this webinar, having concluded the series of presentations, and obviously we've tried to take some questions along the way, and we're going to use our remaining time to get through as many of the additional questions that have been posed as we can. And we've got several additional questions, a number of them related to the proposed actions on healthy ocean ecosystems, a few that are asking about the nature of the RPB when it comes to developing recommendations and the distinction between recommendations and best practices. So I'm just going to start lobbing them over to you, presenters and other members of the RPB. If you want to chime in, as I said at the very beginning, just indicate that you'd like to weigh in, and we'll be glad to hear from you. So the first question, I think this is one for the co-leads. It's more of a general IJC question, and it's from Brent Greenfield. Will the RPB publish the list of criteria that are being used to drive the development of these draft action items?
Bob, are you on? Well, this is Gwen. I will start by saying during one of our, I think it was the last, no, the one before that, during one of our meetings, the RPB did prepare a draft list of criteria that it would use for interjurisdictional coordination actions, identifying which ones that we would be pursuing. Those criteria are currently listed up on the BOEM Mid-Atlantic website, and since that time we have not revisited those criteria, but what we do have is currently up on the website.
Yeah, Gwen, this is Bob. I agree. I was sitting here trying to remember where it was. I think that initially we made sure that the candidate action items met the intent of the Ocean Policy Act, and so and then from there we progressed to a list of candidate ideas that were then vetted through the RPB entities, and in terms of what was practical and doable, and of a longer nature what we should sort of strive towards. So I think that's how it sort of developed.
Okay, so I'm going to go back through the questions that we've got by topic, so sort of back to the top and through the different topics. So starting with healthy ocean ecosystems, a few additional questions. This next one is also from Brent Greenfield. It was noted that the identification of ERAs or areas with region-wide features would lead to a final finding for interested parties. What is the RPB envisioning for this finding? Data, maps, subjective conclusions, or editorial judgments, a combination thereof, or something different entirely?
Hi, this is Laura. Yes, I think those final reports on each selected area would include maps, the best available scientific information and data that we have for that area. It would probably also note additional research needed. But yeah, we would try to make it as complete as we can, laying out all of the available data for each area.
All right, still on the healthy ocean ecosystems topic, question from Noah Chessman. For the research forum agenda action that you described, how does the RPB plan to engage the science community? I think this is similar to a question that we just took from Noah, including government scientists, but also scientists from academia, NGOs, and other scientists to ensure full vetting of the proposed research agenda.
Yes, I think the idea would be to have a workshop that was quite open to, I think, both scientific experts, whether they're academic or you know, in other institutions, as well as traditional knowledge, folks who you know, perhaps spend a good part of their lives out on the ocean and see a lot. We want to value that kind of input as well. So yeah, I think a fairly open kind of workshop to identify and help vet and prioritize research needs.
The next question is from Allie Chase, and the question is, the work that's envisioned to identify trends in the health of ERAs, what's the deadline for this work, and will this research be included in the plan?
I don't think the research will, I don't think it'll be done before this spring. I think there's going to be too much to do. So that would be part of the ongoing work. And again, the idea would be once we agree upon the definitions and have these areas identified, we would select them one by one to do these in-depth reviews to really go into a deep dive for each area about what those trends of health are in each area. So I would envision that as a somewhat long-term, certainly not something that's going to be done in the next 3 months.
The next question is from Sarah Chases, and it's really it's a question and a comment, or a comment and a question. And Laura, you may have a response that you want to share to this. It also may be it's a broader question, it's a process question. So co-leads, you may want to also weigh in. It's important that IJC actions include agency commitments to improved management and conservation of ERAs. This is needed in order to meet the first goal of the planning process, which is to promote ocean ecosystem health, functionality, and integrity through conservation, protection, enhancement, and restoration. So far, we're not seeing such commitments in the IJC actions discussed today, and are very concerned about that and the fact that the Healthy Oceans work group has backed off of making recommendations for management of ERAs. How and when will these commitments be made?
Yeah, I understand the disappointment on the part of the environmental NGOs about that, but I think it was also made very clear, especially from the fishing community and others, that we have to be very careful not to overstep the authority or the lack of authority that the RPB has. And so any management decision will still be the realm of the individual federal agency that has responsibility for managing human uses in the area. And again, that's because if we were to put management recommendations, specific management recommendations into the plan or promulgate those recommendations, and then the federal agencies are required to be in compliance with the plan, that creates that problem of an RPB potentially overstepping its authority. So we have to be very careful in how this is worded and in terms of what the RPB does and does not have authority to do under the law. So I think the best that we can do is to really focus on pulling together and coordinating to get the best available science and data about the importance of these areas, and also putting together that information about how it's currently managed and what the trends are in that area. I think we want to be very careful not to prohibit activities or suggest changes to regulation, if we don't even know exactly what the cause and effect may be with particular human uses. So those have to be well understood. But we will do our best to collect this information and get these good in-depth reviews for these areas, make that information very accessible to all stakeholders so that the federal agencies with authority to make decisions do so with the best available science.
All right, let's continue on this thread with a somewhat related question. And Bob, I think this is a good one for you to field for some clarification for Matt Gov, who is asking if the agency representatives on the RPB run the recommendations by their agency and get approval from their agency that the recommendations make sense, how is that crossing a line of authority? Agencies will be pre-approving any recommendations not being directed by the RPB. The RPB is the agency. The RPBs are supposed to improve management of ocean resources through change, not just compile data.
Well, I think the ultimate goal is to have this information be applied in decision making. And so, first characterizing it, as Laura just nicely described, the ERA effort, we want to get the best available information, put it in a regional clearinghouse that everyone uses at least as baseline information going forward in what their agency or their organization is studying or trying to decide. So I think the RPB effort, what's being cleared in each federal agency is what that agency, through being a champion, has proposed to do to meet the overall goals of better ocean management. And so each agency, as those reviews and approvals go up through the management chain in the agencies, they are stepping forward and saying, yes, we will do this to the best of our ability as long as it fits in with our mission. And so it's not just sharing data for sharing's sake. In BOEM, for example, our research, we can't spend any money on research unless it's applied research that feeds into a decision making. So a lot of our environmental science information that's based on data directly goes into supporting NEPA documents, biological opinions that look at potential impacts to endangered species, marine mammals, et cetera. And also research on monitoring and mitigation and how existing uses can perhaps coexist out there safely. So the overall goal is certainly applying this information to agency decision making, and the RPB, I believe, is a good tool to have the agencies be able to do that, on a cross-sharing of information basis.
All right, next we're still on healthy ocean ecosystems. We have a comment from Mary Kamhi. Mary, I hope I'm saying your last name right. There's quite a bit of discussion on future data gathering and processes and best management practices for coordination of ocean uses within each of the IJC work groups. Mary, if I'm interpreting your comment correctly, I think she's offering a suggestion that each IJC work group include their impacts on healthy ocean ecosystems as part of their work. Okay, so we're going to move on to another topic now, and take a couple of questions on offshore wind energy. And the first question is from Ann Merwin. I wanted to circle back on the question of stakeholder engagement in the offshore energy IJC. I'm still unclear what it will actually look like in execution. Can you speak about how BOEM's stakeholder engagement approaches will change as a result of the ocean plan, as opposed to what BOEM is doing now of stakeholder engagement?
Sure, this is Bob. I believe that some of the slides that I went over today outline some of the higher level stakeholder engagement, like this new White House group that's going to be looking towards advance, overall safe offshore wind in the country. Likewise, we're asking stakeholders to use that Federal Register notice that BOEM has out right now to tell us what they like and don't like about our regulations, our processes, our activities. So that's wide open for comment in any way. In addition, there's a number of workshops that I've mentioned. We'll be reaching out to groups that are involved with the industry to talk to them about what they feel about today's presentation, and we'll be doing that shortly. We'll be certainly BOEM is happy to provide the funding for the stakeholder workshop that Gwen mentioned. That's going to be the day before our next RPB meeting in March. So in all cases, we are trying to get more input on this.
Bob, this is another question for you or Laura to field from Allie Chase. It's on a theme that we've already been discussing in some other questions. Why is it okay to use data to develop best practices for wind and not use the ERA data to develop best practices for management improvements for the environment?
I don't think that it is. I mean, we want to use best data for all those things. I think the best practices that I think are referred to in some of the slides here go to the heart of what we're doing. Some of those best practices are early engagement with constituents when there's projects coming along. Another huge best practice is the commitment to use the portal data and to try to agree on what the best available information is. So the best practices specifically for feeding into offshore wind, I think we were trying to harken back to the overall best practices of things like early engagement and using data, et cetera. I certainly would think that we'd want to use the best information we can to go forward in looking at these ERAs. We have to figure out how they're going to be created, and I think the best way to do that is by full participation of all RPB members.
Okay, Bob, one more for you. This is a comment from Matt Gov about offshore sand. Sand dredging needs to also take into account impacts to offshore recreational use, such as diving. Sand placement on beaches needs to take into account tourism and recreation occurring on the beach and beach swimmer health.
We appreciate that input. I didn't get into, we were speaking of sand in a regional sense, but once an offshore sand site has been identified and that sand is going to be moved on to a specific beach, there's a whole host of environmental reviews that BOEM works with along with the Corps of Engineers and involves the public. And, adding the non-consumptive recreational part is something that we can probably do a better job on. So I do appreciate that comment.
Okay. So now we have a handful of some general questions, not on any of the specific IJC actions necessarily. And this one, Bob, I think this one's for you. It's from Brent Greenfield. Can you provide an update on the development of guidance on how agencies will use the plan, as well as the guidance on the nature and detail for agency commitments? What, if any, plans does the RPB have for public review and comments on such guidance?
Yeah, on that, we're working with the Northeast RPB to come up with a pretty basic overview of how federal agencies will commit to using the plan. And so that's a document that's presently under review in both RPBs. I believe that it's somewhat of, I think it is a public document at this point, but I would have to check with the folks up there on that. But the goal in that document is basically an outline of general statements that would be sort of like a template for each agency to use the information. And I believe the thought is that in the Northeast, I believe that they're going to put Federal Register notices out at some point to get input on that. The Mid-Atlantic hasn't fully discussed or resolved whether we're going to go that route with the Federal Register notices.
All right, and a final question from Brent. The National Ocean Policy Coalition reiterates that 45 days of comment on the draft ocean plan is insufficient for user groups and public review, and asks that the RPB commit to a minimum 90-day public comment period. Is the RPB open to considering a longer comment period?
I think the RPB discussed this at after that was raised, I believe, by Brent at a full RPB meeting. I don't recall if it was the last one or the one before it, but we did discuss that, and we looked hard at the schedule in terms of where we could perhaps come up with some more days for that review. And unhappily, there's so much work to be done to make sure that this is done properly, that taking another few weeks out of the preparation, and the RPB, I think, discussed it and decided that we should not do that. And so we encouraged anyone who really wants to comment to use that 45 days to the best they could. And please, if any RPB member I've mischaracterized this, please let us know.
All right, the final question that has come in is the question about uses that haven't been identified in this suite of IJC actions that has been presented today, but the RPB is planning to include in the plan. And it's, how is the RPB planning on incorporating undersea fiber optic cables and undersea infrastructure into the plan?
This is Bob again. I think we may have had some volunteers to do a cursory look at that as a placeholder, in full recognition of how important it is. There's no one champion that could step up at that time to take on this one, but I believe we are going to address it in the plan, and we have a small working group that will be reaching out to that sector for input on what we do right about it in the plan.
Okay, so thanks to all of you who offered your questions and comments. As I mentioned, these will all be captured for the record and posted with the other materials after this webinar on the RPB website. If seeing no other questions or comments coming in, I think we're ready to wrap up. So again, on behalf of the RPB, thank you very much for attending this webinar. We heard a lot of great input on the draft IJC actions, and it, as always, is very, very important to this process and shaping its direction. As a reminder, some near-term opportunities for continued engagement include the MARCO event on January 29 in Dewey Beach, Delaware, where the MARCO contractors will present ecological and human use data synthesis and regional ocean assessment products. and a stakeholder workshop the day prior to the RPB in-person meeting. So stay tuned for further details about all of those. The materials will be up shortly on the website, and I think that will conclude our proceedings for today. Thank you, and happy holidays.
Thank you to all of our participants for joining today. We hope that you found this webcast presentation informative. This does conclude the webcast, and you may now disconnect. Have a good day.